If you guys have gotten this far, you're almost there, so keep going. My name is Adam Driscoll, and this is my fourth year project for Laurentian University Indigenous Social Work Program. I've also been working here at Hope North since its opening in 2017, and before that, working with Mobile Crisis Services and Community Development with the Northern Health Region. So, um, this is kind of something that I wanted to leave with Hope North for the future and really um, leave something that will allow kids and families and staff all to feel really comfortable working with the youth and figure out what's going on for them and how we can help support them through trauma and care or trauma informed care through figuring out what their problems are and where they might be lacking skills in, and also coming from an Indigenous lens. So we know that we work with mostly Indigenous families and youth coming from all different parts of northern Manitoba, and that's an area where we need to get better as a health region and service provider in providing adequate and culturally competent care. So I hope that is really what you've gotten out of the past three sections, and I guess the last section I have for everybody today, or as you've been working through this manual, is actually working on the crisis stabilization unit for youth. So things that you can consider to take into account, things that I've kind of learned over my few years working here and then working in mobile crisis services for several years as well. Also dipping my toe in community development and working in some communities. Um, so the first thing would be practicing empathy. So regardless of what your beliefs or values or your thought processes are, those aren't everybody's, right? So um, really, when you hear people talk about considering wherever other people are coming from, or wearing their shoes or being in their shoes for a day, so really considering, I guess, where people are coming from and how they are reacting and why they're doing what they're doing, and think of if you were in their shoes, would you be reacting that way if you had been through significant trauma or had been passed along maybe possibly violence through intergenerational trauma? Would you be reacting the same way a kid would be reacting? Most times you're going to probably answer yes, right? I mean, you're going to have things that are going to happen. Um, and that's sometimes how kids are going to react to it. And that's our job to be empathetic and not pity a child or their family, but understand where they're coming from, where their point of view lies, and really working with them. Um, Another point that I always hear, or I like to bring up, it's your job's not about you, right? It's when you're on the unit, you're about the kids, you're about their safety, their stabilization. You're there for those kids and their families. So everything you do on that unit ties back to their best interests. So sometimes that means what you're going to have to do is not always what you feel is the best idea, but it's what's best for that family or it's what's best for that child at the time. So, um, yeah, working in this field, being a support worker or a social worker or whatever the case may be, sometimes you have to sacrifice a little bit of yourself for that, and that's usually so that everybody else can do really well around you. And in our case, sometimes that's um, giving a lot of yourself for the kids that you work with, especially. Um, I know that we've talked about this throughout the entire piece with Indigenous wise practices, and in my conversations with Clint, he always talked about how food was so meaningful in their culture and that they gather around food, and that's how they got to know one another and share love and laughter and grief and loss together. And that is something that definitely works on the unit as well. So sitting down with the kids, eating food with them, yeah, if their parents are here, offering them food as well. Sitting down and having a meal together brings everybody together. You're more likely to get a whole ton of information from kids if you're sitting down and having a meal with them. So, whenever you can have a meal with kids on the unit at dinner time, or if processes allow for change in that, then eat with them. You know, and that's where you share probably the most intimate conversations when you share a meal with somebody. Um, the other thing I wanted to talk a little bit about in this short video is just about space and time. So if you have kids on the unit, you don't need to be right in their personal space all the time, right? Like, if they're not ready to open up to you, you don't need to talk to them right away. You can give them their space. You can give them their time to feel comfortable enough to coming and talking and building a rapport or relationship with the worker. You don't need to continually go to them and be nipping at their toes to like create a relationship with them, right? You can give them time and space, and eventually, most of these kids will come to you. Most of them really do want to connect with somebody, and it's just sometimes they haven't really connected with somebody in a while in a meaningful way, or all they've known is a different way of doing things. So I would say just give kids space and time, and when they are displaying acting out behavior, give them that time and space so that they can cool down and de-escalate on their own terms. And if you do have to redirect them and help through talking them down a little bit, that's okay. But let them see if they can self-regulate on their own first. Like observe and see what skills that they already do have in self-regulation or impulse control. The one thing we always struggle with on the unit is, and not even in the unit, but even just in social work in general or working with kids, is promises. Don't make a promise with a kid that you can't keep. So if you're on the unit and you're telling the kid, I promise I'll come see you, blah, 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 you better be ready to follow through with that outside of your work hours. I never make promises. I'll be straight up and be honest with kids. I find that that's the best method, and say, I can't promise you this or this, but here's what I can do for you, and here's what I am willing to do for you. So still giving them options and giving them some ability to know that you're going to follow through with things, but in terms of creating promises, man, that just creates a whole bunch of problems, especially if you're not fully, like willing to follow through with them, or if you can't, or if something happens where you can't follow through on a promise. That's a lot of the kids we see. People have done that to them before, and a promise is just another broken act by somebody, and we want to create trust and a bond with a lot of these kids in a short period of time. So promises, maybe save those for a longer term relationship, or whatever. Save that for outside of the workplace, honestly. The next thing on my list I have is teamwork. So honestly, when you come to the CSU, it's not a competition. Like, there's no trophy for the best recovery support worker, best nurse, or best navigator. Like, there's no award for that, right? Like, we're all here to do the job together, and it's a really difficult job. So the best way to do it is together. All of us bring something really good to the table, and all different traits or skills or things that we were really confident in. We all as well have things that we need to work on. So maybe there's people that can help. We can help each other work on some of those things, and improve a lot of that stuff and improve our own skills, so that as a team we're better together. So essentially, teamwork does make the dream work, right? And if we're working as a team, then our kids are getting what they need. They're not seeing people that are kind of divisive. They're seeing people that are going to bat for each other or working really hard together to give them that help. And then that's kind of ingrained in what their experience is here on the CSU. The last one for this section is talk about grief and loss. Like, almost every kid that walks through our doors is going to have experienced some sort of grief and loss, especially kids coming from isolated communities where suicide rates are higher, where the death rate is higher due to different social issues or whatever it might be. Man, just be considerate of the kids, and again, it goes back to, I guess, number one on this page, which is practicing empathy. And whenever you have an opportunity to kind of understand where somebody comes from or how they've walked, I think you can better understand a kid and get to know them in a good way. Yeah, most of these kids have extensive grief and loss, and it's one thing that they're going to come in to our unit with always. So it's important that that there's different stages, there's different types of loss and grief, and help them work through it. Be beside them. You don't have to be, again, space and time. Feel them out and observe and watch their situation and monitor situations, and just act slowly and with a plan. Don't go in and expect that a kid is going to immediately just connect with you. Really get to know them as a young person first, and then build on that relationship. Anyways, that's part one, and we'll be on to part two right away.